In hoeverre bemoeit de Amerikaanse ambassade zich met het Nederlandse binnenlands beleid? Welkom bij Uitgelicht. Goedenavond. De voorverkiezingen voor de Amerikaanse presidentsverkiezingen zijn in volle gang. De Democraten zijn druk op zoek naar een kandidaat die het op moet nemen tegen president Trump. In de studio de Amerikaanse ambassadeur in Nederland, Pete Hoekstra. Good evening, Mr. Hoekstra.
Good evening. Good to be with you.
Yeah, good to have you in our show. Election year, a busy year?
A very busy year,
Yeah?
especially when it started a year ago already. I think, different than Dutch elections, we have a run-up to Election Day that this cycle may be a year and a half, almost 2 years long.
How do you follow it here in the Netherlands? What's happening in your home country?
I like watching it from 3,000 miles away. I don't follow it that closely.
No. But you notice that the Democrats have a lot of candidates.
They at one time had a lot of candidates, yes.
Had?
Yes.
Yeah. And they're now bringing it back?
Yep. I think they're down to really 7, 8 viable candidates. Some would argue there's maybe only 3 or 4 viable candidates left.
Yeah. Do you see a candidate who can make it for president?
I think one of the things we've learned about American politics in the last 4 or 5 years, it's very, very unpredictable. Mm-hmm. Most people did not see Donald Trump winning. No. He won. Now we're watching the Democrat cycle unfold. Yeah. Weren't a lot of surprises until 2 months ago when Bloomberg announced that he would enter the race. Yeah. I think I've seen estimates that he's spent up to $400 million already in 2 months. He's promised all of his campaign workers, I think he's got like 2,000 of them already, that he will pay them through December, whether he's the nominee or not. Yeah. And he's rising in the polls. So again, I think it could be a kind of an unpredictable year.
Yeah. Do you see him against President Trump in the race?
It could be. But I mean, I think you've got, you still have Sanders. I think Bloomberg is a factor. Biden, the next 10 days are going to be absolutely critical for the former vice president. You have Buttigieg, the former mayor of South Bend, who may be in there. And then you've got Klobuchar and Warren. Yeah. And that's, I probably missed one in there, but that's, out of those 5 or 6, you're going to get the nominee.
In our eyes, most of them are elder people. Why do they sit at home and join their life?
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at it, I think, what is it? Sanders is 77. Yeah. Bloomberg 78, and Biden is 76. But I think you got 3 of them right there around 70, high 70s, and it's like, wow, that's quite unusual. I mean, you take a look at the Netherlands, and most of your politicians and your members of parliament are much, much younger. Yeah. Yeah.
Your president also is in the 70s?
He's the lower 70s, but he's in the 70s. So it says Americans are looking for experience.
Okay, yeah. Are you going back to the States to help President Trump in his campaign?
If the campaign asks me to, then I would have to resign as ambassador. Yeah. At this point in time, they have not asked me to go back to help in the campaign. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, but there was a story you were running to become the new head of intelligence services.
The president, was considering me last August to be the director of national intelligence. You don't campaign for these jobs. The president and his team, they'll look at your background and they'll select you if they think it's a good time and you're the right person to do it. Okay. The person who is the acting DNI. He's time limited till I think around March 10, at which point in time the president will have to make a decision as to whether he will appoint somebody permanently to get confirmed by the Senate, whether he will appoint somebody to be an acting director again. So we'll just see.
And are you still in for it?
If the president asks you to do something and to serve in his administration, you say yes. If it's the dog catcher, you maybe say, oh, yeah, but okay, Mr. President, if that's what you want me to do, I'll do it. Yeah. But in my job as chairman of the Intelligence Committee back in 2004, I was the chairman of the committee that wrote that legislation, creating the Director of National Intelligence. And so obviously, if I had the opportunity to go back and serve in that position, it would be a great honor. And with my background in it, it would be fascinating to do it.
Okay. Let's go to some actual politics. The Trump peace treaty, Israel and Palestine. How important is that for Trump to succeed?
Well, he's not going to succeed before the election. Mm-hmm. But what the president has done, he's recognized that the attempts over the last 20 years, 25 years, have gotten nowhere. So he and Jared and others have spent months, years, the first 3 years of this administration developing this peace plan, which includes securing the borders of Israel, securing and creating a Palestinian state, investing economically to grow this Palestinian state to being a viable state where people can live their lives, get an education, and find jobs, and those types of things. And so it's important to have a proposal out there that can generate the discussion and the negotiations that will lead to a final outcome. Yeah. I mean, we need peace in the Middle East.
Yeah, but the Palestinians already said, no way.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right?
Yeah.
I mean, you always start with a proposal, and then you recognize that you will begin poldering. You will begin
Dutch word.
A Dutch word. You will begin the discussions.
Yeah.
And after you have a government, after your elections in March, coming up in March, it's not like people are going to say, I'm going to be the prime minister, and you vote for me. It's kind of like, okay, let's figure out which parties can be part of a coalition, and let's negotiate an agreement. And I think last time, what did it take? 7 months? Mm-hmm. So the president, I give the credit to the president. He put a proposal out there that is a real proposal that America is willing to invest in. And now he's saying to the Israelis, to the Palestinians, to other folks in the Middle East who have a vested interest in this, use this as a starting point. We know this will not be the finishing point.
Okay.
But negotiate. We are willing to facilitate where people believe that we can be helpful. But peace is in your hands. We're giving you a starting point.
Start from here and talk about it.
Yeah.
The U.S. left a couple of years ago the UN Human Rights Council because of their anti-Israeli politics. Last week, the Dutch criticized the council because of the same. What's your reaction about that?
That's no surprise. That's why we left.
Yeah.
Being part of a Human Rights Council that you have a lot of states that, do not respect human rights. Mm-hmm. You look at, they're on here. I think during my time in Congress, there were times where countries like Libya and Syria were on this. And you say, excuse me? Yeah. And then they have an agenda that's very anti-Israel. Mm-hmm. And so the United States said, we want to be part of multilateral organizations, okay, but ones that work and that carry forth their mission. The mission of the Human Rights Commission of the UN is to promote human rights, something that the Dutch and the Americans agree very much on. And we work on these things together. Mm-hmm. But we're not going to be part of organizations that have a great sounding name, but when you take a look at functionally what they do, they don't work.
So you think it's a good example for the Dutch that you left?
We made the decision to leave. The Dutch have made the decision, at least to this point, mm-hmm. to try to continue to influence this organization to make better decisions and those kinds of things. And when they make the wrong decision, when this organization makes the wrong decision, like attacking Israel, we appreciate it that the Dutch are there and the Dutch call the council out on that.
Because if you leave, you have nothing to say.
Sure we do, but we can still criticize it, but we're not going to focus on being just a critic on there. We were part of that organization under Republican and Democrat administrations. We tried to influence it, and at some point in time, we've decided that we've reached the threshold of pain. We just can't go to this anymore. And if they continue down this path, the Dutch at some point may reach the same conclusion that says, you know what, investing in this, having people there, going to the meetings and all of that is just not worth it. But it's not America's role to tell the Dutch when that is. America's role is to decide when we've reached that threshold. Other countries will maybe reach that threshold, maybe they won't. But the Dutch are a good voice for what human rights really stands for.
Okay. Let's go to Europe. You noticed last month, the last day of last month, the United Kingdom left the European Union.
I was just in London over the weekend.
You were there?
Yes, it's still working.
Celebrating.
No, we were not celebrating. We were just enjoying London. Mm-hmm. It seems to still be working. The subway works fine.
Yeah. No standstill for the country.
No standstill for the country. But America's view on this is, Brexit. With Brexit, the Brits, the European Union, they've made their decisions. Mm-hmm. Now come up with a deal to the final agreement to make the separation viable. Yeah. Do it in such a way that it works for the EU, it works for the Brits. We've got great economic relationships with both entities, and make it minimize the disruption.
Yeah, is it a good idea to do for the Brits?
That's for them to decide. I mean, I think for them, we'll know in 5 or 10 years whether it was the right decision. But it's not for America to tell the Brits what to do or to tell the Europeans what to do.
Do you think there are more countries who are willing to get out of the European Union?
I don't know. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think they're, I watch it and I watch it very closely. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Because I've got an interest in it, and and we have to. I mean, when I talk with parts of the Dutch government, we talk about trade and those types of things. The response comes back and says, "Well, Pete, that's really not a decision that's made in The Hague anymore. That's a decision that is now a Brussels decision, and the Dutch will provide their input through, the European Parliament, through the Commission, and those kinds of things." And it's kind of like, okay, it's not, So I talk with my Dutch counterparts about what America wants. That we want, more access and equal access to the European market. Mm-hmm. They then need to, if they agree with that, they need to make that argument in Brussels. Yeah. They don't make that decision in The Hague anymore.
Yeah. Okay, you talk with them, but you always you also say something to them. For example, in your relation with China, don't sell ASML things to China.
Yeah.
So it's not talking, it's also...
Well, that's a different issue. That falls under limiting what we call critical technology. Mm-hmm. It's the Wassenaar arrangement, I think it's called, where 42 countries signed on. They identified certain technologies that have dual use. They can be used for commercial purposes. They can be used for defensive purposes, or in the military. And so, but the Dutch put the technology on that ASML produces, put it on that list. Yeah. We've said now that as ASML is considering, selling this technology to China, it's kind of like, wait a minute. We have the Wassenaar arrangement. Mm-hmm. The Dutch are a part of it. The Dutch identified this technology as being a critical national security technology. And we're just asking the Dutch, okay, ultimately it will be a Dutch decision as to whether ASML can sell this to China or not.
Okay, but it's not, in your opinion, telling the Dutch what to do?
No. I mean, the Wassenaar agreement, arrangement clearly makes what ultimately happens a decision of the specific country.
But we know that you're in a trade war with China.
We're not in a trade war with China. We just signed an agreement with China, phase 1 agreement, where we address money laundering, where we addressed intellectual property, we addressed tariffs, we addressed the trade imbalance and those kinds of things. The people, sometimes the media, I think, is, it's a whole lot more interesting when we describe the relationship with the U.S. and China as a trade war. Yeah. It's a lot more interesting to the media when we describe the relationship between Europe and the United States as a trade war.
War sounds better.
War, well, I'm not sure, but it maybe sells more news. Yeah. What we're asking, and we have got the same interests in mind that the Dutch have. Mm-hmm. We want to protect our intellectual property. We want to protect, our financial relationships, the rule of law. In 2001, when I was in Congress, we voted to allow China to enter into the World Trade Organization, WTO. I voted against it. Others voted for it, saying this is going to allow, and the result will be China will embrace the values, over time will embrace the values of the West. All of these things, law-abiding, financial standards, intellectual property, and these types of things. And in reality, China did not. And they've used these last 19, 20 years to grow their economy, but not open up their markets. Dutch companies can't go into China the same way that they go into the U.S. U.S. companies can't sell, and so.
Okay, but in the meantime, some people in The Hague are scratching behind their ears and say, Mr. Hoekstra, what are you doing? It's not your business, it's our business.
Actually, let me give you our vision for the relationship between the U.S. and Europe.
Yeah.
And Secretary Ross communicated this very clearly to your ministers in January at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. And I think Mike Pompeo said the same thing at the Munich conference last week. The United States believes that to compete successfully in the world, long term, America's interest lies in having the strongest economic relationship America has will be with the EU. And we make that relationship stronger by opening up both markets, opening up the United States more to Europe and opening up Europe more to we got to take the 340 million Americans, the 540 Europeans, put them together, and we get to somewhere between 800 and 900 million people.
So it's the best for both of us.
A strong economic relationship between us is the best way to grow both of our economies and to compete against the unfair competition coming from China.
Okay, you're talking with our political parties, I saw on Twitter. You post some photos. What party looks most like the Republican Party? Were you a member of?
Oh, it's interesting when I go around and talk to all the parties. GroenLinks, they're totally with us on 5G in China.
Yeah.
All right. There's other parties that are with us on a regulatory environment and taxes and those kinds of things. So my job here as the ambassador is to find out what I can work with in each one of the parties that promote America's interest and to get to a coalition.
But you did go to Forum for Democracy and spoke on their Congress.
They invited me to. I went to...
you go to every party who's inviting you?
I go to every party. I make the offer to meet with every party. I think 12 parties usually take me up on the offer. So, sure. Terry asked me to go speak to their Congress. The folks from DINK asked me to spend a day with them in Schiedam. So I went and spent 7-8 hours in Schiedam walking around, talking to people.
You didn't find a party where you think, well, this looks most like the Republican Party?
Oh, I maybe did, but I'm not going to talk about it. I don't talk about Republican. I can't talk about Republican and Democrat parties, and I don't interject myself into the politics here. The nice thing is I think I've got friends in most of the parties, at least a professional relationship where they say, if I've got an issue, I know I can call Pete up and we can talk about it.
Okay.
That's what I need to do.
Last question, Mr. Hoekstra. This year we celebrate 75 years of freedom. When there comes a conflict again in Europe, do the Americans come over and help us?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Without any doubt?
Without any doubt. We're fully committed to Article 5. Yeah. We are fully funding our commitment to NATO. More than that, you'll see that in some major military exercises that will take place in March. No, we are fully committed to it. I think the bigger question that we have is, what European countries are as committed to NATO in Article 5 as what we are.
Thank you for this conversation. Having you in
Thank you. Always good to be here.
Dit was Uitgelicht voor vandaag. Dank voor het kijken. Morgen bij Leven en Welzijn. Dan zijn we er weer. Fijne avond en graag tot dan. Dag.